Today I'm going to answer the million-dollar question, how do you become a UX writer? Hey guys, welcome back to UX Hero, the home of UX writing on YouTube. Now I've been a UX writer, a lead UX writer, UX writing manager, head of content, and so today I'm going to share with you the lessons I've learned, the knowledge I've gained, in the hope that this will be useful to those of you looking to get into UX writing. Now there's a lot to cover, there's timestamps down below, so let's dive straight in. Here are the 10 things you need to know to become a UX writer. That's too long. Here are the top 10 tips to become a UX writer. No, we can do better than that. How to become a UX writer in 10 simple steps. Okay, so let's get started with how I got into UX writing. This might be useful for some of you out there. I actually studied a foreign language, and so I worked in translation for about 5 or 6 years. I then joined a company who were hiring translators, however it turned out to be UX writing, or rather we changed it into UX writing. So when I joined, we were actually just translating the content the product managers would write. Over time we managed to change that into, we'll write the content, you just tell us what this function is. And then again, gradually over time, it became that we were taking part in the design reviews before design was even finished. So it was UX writing in the end, but it all started with translation. Now this might sound unorthodox, but it's not that uncommon. John Saito of Dropbox made the same transition. He was originally a translator for a video game company, I believe, before joining Dropbox as a UX writer. So if you are a translator, if you speak a foreign language, this can be a good way in. I would say look for jobs that include translation of UI strings, and then see if you can make the same changes to the process that I did, eventually changing into pure UX writing. But even if you can't, I would say that translating UI strings is a type of UX writing in its own right. Okay, so maybe you don't speak a foreign language, maybe you're not a translator. What other kinds of professions can you come from to join UX writing? Or rather, what kind of people make good UX writers? As a UX writing manager, I've probably managed 50 plus writers, and because of where I'm located, the majority of those did come from translation. I've also had a large number of people come from other forms of writing, whether that's creative writing, some kind of copywriting, or even technical writing. But I also had one lady who at one point was the manager of an ice cream shop. So you don't need a background in writing or languages. Really, there's one key skill you need. Everything else you can learn, design, writing, but this one skill, if you've got this, you can be a UX writer. And that's empathy. This skill is crucial as a UX writer because the rest of the company, product managers in particular, but also designers sometimes lack the ability to look at their work from the customer's point of view. And so when I see a confusing design, a poor user flow, I often tell whoever's worked on that, you know too much. By working at this company, you've forgotten that the customer knows nothing. You're so involved in this product and this user flow, you've forgotten that the customer knows nothing about it. And as a UX writer, it's your job to learn everything there is to know about that product or that user flow or that feature, but then pretend you know nothing and reevaluate it. Does it still make sense to somebody who doesn't work at the company, who doesn't know the logic behind it? So it doesn't matter if you've got a background in writing, languages, so long as you have empathy, so long as you can look at something from an outsider's point of view and see, does it make sense, then you can be a UX writer. Okay, I just want to give a few words of advice to people that are coming from some kind of traditional writing, because the only people that I've seen struggle, or rather the people that I've seen struggle the most adapt to UX writing, have been people who've come from some kind of traditional form of writing, typically copywriting of some sort. Everything you've learned as a writer, creative writer, technical writer, whatever it is, will apply to UX writing in some way. It'll still come in handy. However, there's a lot to learn. And if you're a writer, there's going to be a lot to unlearn. I've seen this in person and I've seen this online. People coming from some form of writing with 5, 10, 15 years experience and assuming instantly they're going to be an expert at UX writing. I'm very good at UX writing, but that doesn't mean I can go and write a novel. The skills don't translate that directly. So my advice is just be ready to not necessarily start from zero, but to learn a new skill, absorb as much information as you can. Be ready to break some of the rules that you've had to follow before. For instance, this is not the place to be flexing your vocabulary skills. You want to be keeping your content at about a 7th grade reading level or lower. Another thing you've got to get used to is that people are not coming to read your content anymore. As a writer, you were crafting a piece of copy that hopefully you wanted people to read. You might have measured that using metrics like views, likes, shares. However, UX writing, for the most part, your job is to get out of the way. That's not to say there aren't times where you can be creative, but it's about usability before creativity. And getting used to the fact that people are coming to your website not to read your copy anymore can be difficult for some writers to adapt to. So just be ready for that if you are coming from some form of traditional writing. Like I say, absorb as much information as you can. Be ready to unlearn some things, learn some new things, and you'll be fine. Okay, so what should you learn? I know a lot of people ask, to be a UX writer, do you need to learn UX design? And I would say yes, to a degree. I think the areas you need to focus on can be broken down into 3: UX writing, UX design, and tools. Obviously, you need some kind of understanding, some basic foundation in UX writing. You need to know what makes good copy, what makes bad copy, the different types of microcopy, error messages, empty states. You need to know what these are and the rules and general principles for writing for each of those. And while I say you don't need a background in writing, having good spelling and grammar is definitely going to help. But let's go a little bit further. If I was interviewing somebody for an entry-level position, I might ask questions like, title case or sentence case? Why? Oxford comma, yes or no? Now, there's no right or wrong answer there, but as a UX writer, I'd expect you to at least have an opinion and be able to explain it. You need to be passionate about UX content. What's the difference between voice and tone? Again, this is the kind of basic knowledge I would expect even an entry-level UX writer to have. I need to know that if you're going to be writing for the website or the app, that you can follow a brand voice and tone and understand the difference. I might give you an error message and say, what's the shortest you can make this? I might say, here's an example brand voice. Can you change this error message to fit the brand voice? Just see how you do with something like that. So you need some kind of foundational knowledge in UX writing. Just like somebody who writes for social media knows the optimal length of a Facebook post, I would expect you to know how many words can you realistically put on a button. Now, the second area of knowledge I recommend you focus on is UX design. Now, you don't need to know all the ins and outs, but UX writing is a part of UX design, and the more design principles you know, the better a writer you will be. You can't approach this like a copywriter. Now, there's some great introductory books out there. UX for Beginners is a good one. Some great websites like The Laws of UX, Nielsen Norman Group. I'll leave links for these all down below. I would definitely recommend you check those out. But again, let's go a little bit deeper. If you're looking for a more senior role at some point, but even maybe an entry-level position at some companies, I would expect you to know some basic UX design principles. I would expect you to be able to tell me not just when a design is bad, but why is it bad? What could the designer do to improve it? And not just in terms of content. A lot of UX writers complain that they don't get a seat at the table, and I think the problem is that they fail to understand design principles, and so design typically don't see the point in inviting them. If it's just a point of checking if the words will fit, they can probably do that with you later, but if you can prove that you understand design principles and how content fits into that, it'll be a lot easier to get a seat at the table. In fact, when UX writers ask me what they can do to improve, I often say, read up on UX design. I very rarely tell them to read up on UX writing if they've got the basics down. A great example is my Medium article on loading animations, and I'll leave a link down below. But if you can understand the psychology behind certain UX elements, it will change how you write for those elements. Now, in my Medium article, I discuss static images versus animations for loading pages. And if you don't understand the principles and the psychology behind why we have loading images and animations, how can you write for one of them? Again, this would be a great interview question if I say to you, I've got a search function, you click search, there's a loading animation, and then the results appear. And I say, I need some copy for that loading animation. What would you put? Now, if you come back straight away and say, I would put loading, ... or some variation of that, that's fine, but I would ask you one question. How long is the loading animation on screen? And this is where a lot of UX writers trip up. They just fixate on the words. They don't think about their copy as part of a finished product, as part of website design. Anybody can stick words on a website, but if you can tell me how Miller's Law affects your work, or how information architecture is a part of your job, then I know that you understand at least basic design principles. And again, check out my video on Aftership to see how information architecture affects the work of a UX writer. And lastly, there's tools. Now, I would say don't worry about this one too much, just learn the basics of one tool. My advice is to learn Figma, however, that's entirely up to you. If your company uses something other than Figma, that's fine, the skills will transfer over. Just have a look online, see what's cheap on something like Udemy, just learn the basics. But that'll look great on your CV if you can say you at least know the basics of something like Figma. Okay, so you know what to learn, but where do you learn it? You really have two options. You can either take a course or you can try and self-study. Let's talk about courses first, and we'll go through the pros and cons. So in terms of pros, they're structured, and so you don't have to traipse around the internet yourself trying to find this information. You get guidance and feedback, which is very important for newcomers to UX writing. And thirdly, you typically come out with a case study, or you should do, something you can put in your portfolio. Now, really, there's only two cons. The first one is that there are no industry standards, there's no regulation, and so a lot of courses base their pricing on the certificate that they offer. The problem is that companies will not recognize that certificate. So if you're looking at a course that is quite expensive because of that certification, I would say be very careful. Really, companies only want to see your portfolio. And that leads me to number two, which is the price. Some courses, even introductory courses, might be out of some people's price range, which is perfectly fine. That's why we're going to talk about the free options as well. It's up to you which option you take. Okay, quick disclaimer, I've not taken any paid courses, so make sure you do your own research on these. Information and courses can change. Make sure you check on somewhere like Reddit and just see what other people are saying about these courses. Let's start with a couple of free courses. I recommend you all take these because, well, they're free, there's no risk. The first one is UX Writing Hub. The second is Daily UX Writing. I recommend you check both of those out. Now we come on to paid courses. Now the first one is UX Writing Hub. So if you enjoyed their free course, I would recommend you check out their UX Writing Academy. Again, I've not taken that, but I have seen the portfolio of somebody who did, and they recently landed a job. So that's the first one I recommend checking out. The second one is UX Writing Collective. They have a range of courses. They've got an introductory one. I think it's in a similar price bracket, at least at the time of recording. That's a name that comes up a lot as well, so I would definitely recommend checking those two out first. Now, regardless of whether you take free courses or paid courses, I do recommend you take some basic UX design courses, and there are a ton of these that are reasonably priced. I took this one on Udemy. I didn't love it. I thought it was a little bit too theoretical, but check it out yourself. I've also seen this one recommended a lot. The reviews look good, the syllabus looks good. I've not taken it, but if I was going to take one, I might be interested in this one. But with UX design being so much more mature, especially online in terms of information, there's plenty of stuff on YouTube, so you could do this yourself. But check out some courses. If you see some things that are on sale on Udemy, they constantly have sales, might be worth checking out. Another option which is paid is IDF, Interaction Design Foundation. They've got a range of courses. At the time of filming, at least, this is a monthly subscription model that they've got, so that might be worth checking out. Again, I've not taken any of these paid courses apart from the Udemy one. Just make sure whatever course you're looking at, especially for UX writing, that you're going to come out with some kind of case study, something you can put in your portfolio. Okay, so your other option, if you don't have around $1,000 to spend on a course, because I understand that's a lot of money, you can self-study. I do believe it's possible, so long as you can put together a case study by yourself at the end. So we'll look at how you go about doing that. Now, there are a ton of books on UX writing, UX design, so make sure you're just absorbing as much information as you can. There's tons of information on YouTube. The only thing I'll say to be careful of is medium.com, because anybody can write anything and put it on there, and they do. There's some very bad and outdated content on medium.com, so I would say just follow well-established, respected people in the industry. Whenever I hear somebody say you should never use passive voice for UX content, I know they probably got that from a Medium article and it's just not true. So be very careful on Medium. Check out the Laws of UX, which I mentioned earlier, link down below, along with Nielsen Norman Group for some great research-based information. But in terms of how do you put this together into a case study, if you're not taking a structured course, I would say check YouTube for UX design case studies and see how UX designers put together their portfolio. There's tons of free information out there. Just see how they structure it and apply that to your own case study. So I would say doing it for, maybe not for free, but for cheap is definitely doable if you're proactive and you can find the information yourself. And importantly, if you can put together a portfolio. If I was going to do it, I would buy all the books on UX writing, buy some books on UX design, maybe take some Udemy courses on UX design, and then I would check on YouTube to see how to put together a case study for UX design and just apply that to UX writing. Speaking of portfolios, just want to touch on where to build one because there's a few options now. You have the traditional website building / site hosting options, whose name I'm not going to mention unless they sponsor this video. There are some website builders that are designed specifically for design portfolios, although I think the pricing of those is not as reasonable as maybe just a traditional website builder. But I also saw a portfolio recently done on Notion, and that looked great. So I think there's three options there. You could go down the traditional website builder, you could go for a design portfolio-based website builder, or just Notion. So there's a few options there. I would say don't get too hung up on which one you choose. It's more important what you actually put in your portfolio. Now, like I say, it doesn't matter what platform you choose. What's important is the information you include in there. You want to be putting in either past projects or case studies. If you're brand new to UX writing, just 2 or 3 case studies is perfectly fine. Now, regardless of whether it's a past project or a case study, make sure you show the thinking behind the content. Don't just include pretty mock-ups. Don't just include a few examples of witty plays on words. I need to know, why is it witty? Is that in line with the voice and tone? Why is that a voice and tone? Is it right to be witty at this point in the user flow? Hiring managers don't just want to see cohesive sentences, they want to see that you can solve problems with your content. So if you've got any ugly user flows, any problems that you were a part of the solution of, include those. And again, check on YouTube for designers, see what they're doing for their portfolios, see how they structure a case study and talk about the research and thinking behind those projects. Okay, so you've got your portfolio, you should definitely be applying for jobs, but if you're struggling to get a foot in the door and you want to beef up your portfolio a little bit, how do you get those first commercial jobs? Now, I'm not going to lie to you, UX writing is very competitive right now, which is why I suggest you learn some design principles and a design tool, but I'll give you a couple of tips for things you might try if you're struggling to get that first position. Now, what you need is some kind of commercial work, but my advice is reach out and offer your services free or very cheaply. And one of the best places to start is with local businesses. If you know a local business owner who has an online presence, chances are they might be open to having you come in and help them out with the copy on their website, and boom, you're an experienced UX writer. Another great one to try is charities and non-profits, especially local ones. They typically don't have the budget or the time to spend on good website design, and I've seen some pretty bad non-profits websites that look pretty rough. But this is great news for you as a new UX writer. This is all low-hanging fruit, so reach out to them, offer your services for free, and again, you're an experienced UX writer. Again, I'm not saying don't apply for paid jobs, definitely keep doing that, but if you're struggling to get a foot in the door, offer your services for free or very cheaply to some of these local organizations. Okay, this is the last tip, and I think this applies to whether you're applying for a paid job or just to a local organization for free. If you're struggling, really struggling to get that foot in the door, my advice is to do a review of that company's website or app in its current state. Now, I'm not saying you should tear it to shreds. Obviously, you want to give constructive criticism. Don't be stepping on anybody's toes here, but do a review of their homepage. Look for key areas where there's some problems. Show them what the problems are, explain why they're problems, and show them how you'd improve that. You don't have to do a complete rewrite, but you might be the first UX writer this company's hiring. Even if you're not, if you can show that you've done the research, if you can show real actionable value that you would bring to this organization, I think that'll help you a lot. Just be sure to include some explanations why you would change that content, and be very careful not to tread on anybody's toes. Honestly, you could probably try this approach with companies who are not hiring UX writers. If you can reach out to them and show them the problems, they might see the value in hiring a dedicated UX writer. So there you have it, guys, how to become a UX writer in 10 simple steps. Each of these really could be a standalone video. We've just scratched the surface. So if you'd like more information, leave a comment and I'll go a little bit more in depth. Hopefully that's been useful for those of you looking to get started. Welcome to the wonderful world of UX writing. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.